Welcome to The Currency of Grief, the podcast where we confront two of society's most taboo topics, death and money. My name is Justin Weidenfeld, and I'm here to serve as your grief financial officer, guiding you through the complex and emotional journey of what happens when money and mortality collide. Whether you're navigating the aftermath of losing a loved one, looking for practical advice on handling pre- and post-death planning, or simply just wanting to start those hard conversations about legacy while you still can, this space is for you. Together, we'll hear real-life stories from real-life people who have navigated the intersection of grief and money and come out the other side. Our guests will share their stories, practical insights, valuable advice, and moments of clarity so that none of you have to navigate this alone. I'm grateful you've decided to join us on this journey. Now let's dive in. So without further ado, let's meet our guests for today's podcast. I'm humbled and honored to be in the virtual studio with Emily Bouchard. Emily is a family dynamics expert, former family therapist, TEDx speaker, and the host of the Wealth Coherence podcast. Emily's work helps families navigate the emotional realities of inheritance, trust, and legacy. After losing her mother at just 14 years old and experiencing firsthand how grief and inheritance can fracture relationships, she became passionate about helping families have the conversations most people avoid. In this episode, you'll learn practical ways to start those difficult family conversations about wishes, values, inheritance, and purpose, so grief doesn't become compounded by confusion, silence, or regret. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Justin. I'm so inspired by what you're doing and how you're really opening up this conversation and empowering people around this very difficult topic.
I really appreciate it. And just our relationship, having met through Deborah, a friend of the podcast as well. I just love following you and your journey and everything that you're doing in the space as well. And I'm glad that there's other people like you, pushing rowing the boat forward and helping people have these conversations that many of us avoid. But when I asked you about coming on the podcast, what made you say yes and want to come on the podcast and share your story?
Well, I chose to share it in a big way in my TEDx this past September, and it's gotten such a overwhelmingly positive response that I realized that telling my story makes a difference, and everybody has their own experience of grief and loss within their families, and learning how to communicate about it and trust each other around it has become like a life's work for me, as largely as a result of how my mom died and when. And it's something I'm really passionate about as well, like you.
Yeah, I feel like that life-changing traumatic event, especially so young, really does change your perspective and your passions. And, I definitely look up to you and how you've transformed it into a career for you. And that's, what we're trying to do here as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't something I thought I could do. It wasn't like I had that trajectory, like this is what I'm going to do for my life's work, but it was more, it led me to have such curiosity around how do people handle, metabolize, expand, have a loss not be something that debilitates, but can actually inform life in a powerful and empowering way. And it led me down so many different tangents and to where I am now, which is something I never even knew existed. So,
100%. And we'll get into your work and your experiences through that, helping families. But here on The Currency of Grief, as our listeners know, we don't hold back. We dive right in. So, Emily, tell us about your grief story.
Yeah. So it's I don't know how it is for you, but with your dad, but it's like as vivid for me today as it was when it happened. So grew up in a very happy home. I have an older brother who's 3 years older. I have a younger brother who's 10 years younger. And we had moved from New York to Houston when I was 13. And we were settled in a lovely home. And my dad was really happy with his work. And my mom was starting to make new friends. And it was like life had already had like a major transition. And in October of 1980, my mom was just cleaning the guest room upstairs. My brother was in his room. I was in mine. My younger brother, I think, was watching Saturday morning cartoons or something. And my mom called out in pain. She had her excruciating headache. And before that moment, she'd been the pinnacle of health. She'd never had a health complaint.
Wow.
There was no symptoms. There was no warning. And what had happened was she had a aneurysm, so a bubble in one of her blood vessels in her brain was very weak, and nobody knew it was there. It never caused her any problems. She never complained of headaches. And something about that wall of that vessel broke in that moment. And it wasn't like she was having an argument with somebody and was really, it was, she was just doing her thing and, I don't know, vacuuming or cleaning the bathroom or something, like nothing major.
Yeah.
And she was completely stricken. She lay down. She was like, it was so painful. And my brother, he had the foresight to call 911. I was kind of like, what do you need? Like, need cold compress. Like, I didn't know what to do. And my dad was playing tennis. He played tennis every Saturday morning, and there were no cell phones then or anything. And he arrived home, thankfully, while she was still conscious. And we let him know something was wrong. He needed to come upstairs right away. And they connected just really briefly. And she wasn't able to see at that point. And she said, this is really bad. I don't think I'm going to make it. And that was their last exchange, really. And then she lost consciousness, and the paramedics came, and they took her. The hardest thing for me of all of it was that the ambulance was in the driveway, and they brought her downstairs in the gurney, and they put her in the ambulance, and my dad was out there with them, and they sat in the driveway for a very long time. And my brother and I were in the house. He was 17, I was 14, Andrew was 4. And we were I remember just standing at the window looking and like feeling the sense that we weren't allowed to go out there and be like, what's happening? What's going on? What's wrong? We had to just sit and wait.
Yeah.
And just that not knowing and that total uncertainty and fear. It's so visceral. I mean, I can feel it now. It's like my chest is tight. I can hardly breathe as I'm talking, because it was just so terrifying. And it seemed to last forever. And then they finally drove off, and my dad, I don't know if he went with them or if he followed. I think a neighbor might have come. I don't even remember the rest. It's all a blur.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until much later when my dad came home that he let us know what had happened. So we had this like really extended time of total uncertainty and fear. And because we had moved from New York, we were away from all of our relatives and closest friends, right? We'd only just arrived there a year before. And, we were a very tight-knit family. We would go into New York, the city, all the time. We would see my relatives all the time. My mom's family was in Connecticut. So we went from a very tight-knit, close, family, extended family support system to we were really alone. And family, came as fast as they could and flew down and tried to support us and figure what they could do. But it wasn't the same as like being close by. It wasn't like my dad could drop us off at his parents or something. And so just in terms of my mom's journey, she never regained consciousness. And within 72 hours, they knew she wasn't going to recover, but they kept her on life support for 10 days. So that was on the October 10th, and October 20th is when they took her off life support to give people a chance to be notified, to give us a chance to get our heads around it. Like it was, she wasn't really alive after 72 hours, but, so, that was also another time of a lot of uncertainty and pain.
Yeah. Cause your last 10 days with your mom were, she wasn't the person that I'm sure you remember her as. Talk to us about, the person that your mom was. What was she like, at home and in the community?
Oh my gosh. One of my favorite stories about my mom is we would go to Cape Cod every summer, and it was our favorite place, and we would go to the beach, and we would just have such a great time. And we would rent a house. We'd go to the same house every time. And um, we got to the Cape. It was right when Richard Nixon was getting, I don't know if he was in the middle of an impeachment or something was happening, where a lot of stuff in the news about him. And the thing I remember is that that house that we rented had a color TV. And we did not have a color TV in our home at that time. It's hard for people to believe. I'm sure you can't even imagine. I didn't know Batman and Robin had color costumes, right? Like it was all black and white and gray. So it was a big deal to see a color TV. And my dad, this is my dad's sense of humor. He started playing with the knobs and he turned Nixon's face green. And he was laughing and he was having so much fun. And my mom, this is my mom to a T. She was like, Milton, be kind. You have no idea what that man's going through. Don't be so cruel. Like, he doesn't know that dad's turning him green, but that was her degree of empathy and always thinking about other people and, never said an unkind word. And like, she was a really wonderful person. And it was one of those things my dad would say, if somebody doesn't like your mom, do not spend any time with them because they're not worth knowing. Like, because she, he just thought of her as such a good person. And she really was. She was very kind and thoughtful. And, she was the kind of mom that, like, if she got a phone call from somebody that she really didn't want to talk to, she'd stay on the phone and, she'd be like, She might put the phone down, bring it back up. And then she'd ask me to say something so she could get off the phone as opposed to just saying, hey, I can't talk right now. Or, so it was an interesting way to see, that's how you do life. Like I learned a lot from her in terms of how not to be straight with people. That was something I had to unlearn. But she was always thinking about like not wanting to hurt other people's feelings or not wanting to make waves or that sort of thing. She was known in the neighborhood for going around and picking up litter, and was just very social. She would put on really lovely dinner parties, and she would take really good care to pay attention to who was invited and what they had at the last meal, the times she'd done it before, and she really liked to do that and connect with people that way.
It sounds like she just had an incredible personality, just the beacon of kindness. And I see it now, through you, how kind you are and an amazing judge of character. Like I would love that, just to be able to bring anybody home and be like, hey, mom, like spend 5 minutes with this person. Let me know what you think. Should they be my best friend or not? And like, seventh grade.
Yeah.
How old, what was your mom's name and how old was your mom when she passed?
So her name was Joan, and she was born in 36 and she died in 80. So she was 44.
Okay. And you mentioned having just being in a new environment, being away from your family, your siblings, going into New York City, stuff like that. Who gave you support when we call it here on the Currency of Grief, the grief cliff, when all the families left after, a couple of weeks or maybe a month or so, who gave you support in those months, years after your mom passed?
Yeah, that's a good question. There were a couple of people. One was a woman who was a secretary, and my dad ran a department at the Children's Hospital, and he had a secretarial pool that served all the different pathologists. And there was a young secretary, her name was Debbie, and she was just super kind to me. And she would, take me out to the movies or take me out to go to ice cream and she just was like a big sister to me. And I didn't have a big sister. And it was just like she knew. And it wasn't like she was like, how are you doing? She just showed up and was kind and thoughtful and invited me to, like a big sister would. And that was really lovely and made it, touches my heart deeply that she did that.
Mm-hmm. That's really special.
Yeah. And then I had some teachers that were very kind, and I really buried myself in my schoolwork. That was a way to, I guess, not feel how painful it was. So I would just really study hard. And so I would stay after school and I would work with the teachers on things. And I really love math. I love my calculus teacher. And I mean, I was a freshman, so I guess it might have been algebra or geometry. I don't know. I love
Hmm.
my math teachers.
Wow.
um, and my health teacher was really helpful too. Because there were like, I mean, I remember coming home and telling my dad, while my mom was still alive, I was like, you might want to look into to organ transplant, and maybe her corneas could help somebody see,
Wow.
it was like that's we're a medical family,
Hmm.
and my health teacher was talking about that kind of thing, and so I was like, oh, so it was like a way to have some sort of sense of control or say, I don't know. Looking back, I just these are just the little things I remember.
For sure. And you mentioned you have a younger brother and an older brother.
Hmm.
And so, in your at 15, 16, 17, being the only woman in the house now, among, the empty seat at the table, how did the dynamics within your family and at home change? Do you remember that?
Well, it's not exactly like how you described it, which is really interesting, right? Because I think I would
Mm,
have had a very different experience if that had been the case. My father was completely in shock, right? He had a 4-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 17-year-old, and he was we had a very traditional marriage, right? Mom
yeah.
stayed at home, cooked, took care of us. He went to work. And he found a couple of different housekeepers to help us, and they were just one nightmare after another in different ways. And he very soon after my mom died started a relationship with another doctor that he met. I don't know, one of the conferences, and she probably showed up compassionately and understanding about his loss because everyone knew, and they started seeing each other. And so my mom died in October, and I want to say in December, he told us about him. I don't know for sure, but she moved in April. So
Wow.
it was super fast and a major, like double shock to the family
Mm,
system to have this new person become part of our lives. And there was never an empty seat at the table, really.
mm,
And that was another hard thing to navigate. And she was quite a remarkable woman to deal with 3 shell shocked kids and a grieving husband.
for sure.
So yeah, they got married the following January after she moved in. So
Wow.
it was pretty quick, and she she was in my life more than my mom. She died
Mhm.
in so they got married in 86 and she moved in 85, and she died in 2019. So that was a whole other grief story we can talk about another time.
Mhm.
But, yeah.
Yeah. And is your dad still alive?
Yes, he's 91,
Amazing.
and he was playing tennis 3 times a week just
Mhm.
2 weeks ago. He caught a cold that kind of threw him back a little bit, but
Okay.
I could see him bouncing back and playing tennis again. He's
I love
quite
that.
something, yeah. Yeah, and
Wow.
he's with it, talk to him regularly and go visit him pretty regularly. Yeah.
That's great. When, so, family dynamics aside, for you
Mhm.
personally, experiencing the loss of your mom
Yeah.
so early in life, and I do grief work with children at experience camps, knowing that it impacts every child differently. When and how did the loss impact you the most? Was there a moment later in life
Mhm.
where you're like, "Hey, I really wish I had my mom for this,"
Mhm.
or was it earlier in life?
Yeah, it's interesting. I almost think I I have an analogy I use, which is it's really interesting you're asking this question this way. You know the children's toy, the Slinky. Um,
Hmm.
Imagine a metal one, right? Like I know they make plastic ones now, but when I was a kid, they were metal.
Yeah.
Imagine taking one when it's like it just kind of looks like a can, right? It's just a small cylinder that's all tight, and you take a
Hmm.
knife and you score it from top to bottom, so that there's like a notch that goes all the way through it.
Yeah.
It's not like cut in half, but there's just like, there's a groove. And then you open it up and then it becomes a spiral and you hit that notch every time you go up the spiral. And for me, her death, that sudden death was like, boom, like that was a heck of a notch in that spiral. And then
Yeah.
every year at the anniversary of her death, I would like encounter myself again. And it's like, oh, who am I in relationship to her loss now? And like, so it's like this marking of time. And I don't know what it's like for you, but it took me years to realize I had to anticipate October being a tough month. Like it would
Hmm.
hit me, like totally sideswipe me, but like, why am I so depressed? Or why am I having such a hard time? It's like, oh, it's October. Like it's, it's, oh, October 20th next week. And it's like, it let me know like, oh, the body holds
Yeah.
memory. And there's this whole other part of us that's tracking things if our conscious mind is completely avoiding it or ignoring it.
Hmm.
Um, so I would say almost like in every decade, there might have been something, a couple of ones that stand out are, when I met my husband and was getting married and not having her as part of the planning of the wedding and her not meeting him, not knowing my stepdaughters, and then not being there when I went through the divorce, right? And like could have used her
Hmm.
motherly advice and support.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you where it hit me the hardest, which is really interesting. And I don't know if you've heard about this, but I when I turned 44, I
Hmm.
my body totally shifted and I went into full blown menopause. Like I was totally fine one minute and the next minute I was in like there was no like years of not and I then realized like my ability to become a mother died at 44.
Mm.
Where she had physically died when she was 44.
Yeah.
And that was a very significant time for me. And my work really was challenged. I was somebody I worked with regularly. We worked with a lot of different families. We were traveling all over the country. He got really mad at me one day and he's like, what is wrong with you? You are not like you normally just are. You're like not tracking well. You didn't follow through with this thing. And he got mad. And I went, huh, let me think. Well, I know
Yeah.
I'm physiologically going through a lot of things, but I just turned 44 and my mom was 44 when she died. And he stopped and he was like, oh, I'm really sorry. I, you're in your death year. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, you're going to be a completely different person when you turn 45. But there's something about when you hit the year, the age your parent was when their parent died, especially when it's your same gender parent, there's this whole unconscious psychological thing around, is this my last year?
Yeah.
And that had me completely reorient. So I really started to look at life very differently from that year on. So I'd say
Wow.
that was the most significant for me.
I've never heard of that, the death year, but
Yeah.
it definitely makes sense because I have mentioned, and many other guests have mentioned on the podcast that, um, I hope I live past, 44, in my case, 52.
Yep.
And, that is my goal, is to outlive a parent. And then I also, thinking about it in my situation, I hope this resonates with our audience, is like, I think every August, which is the month that my dad passed away, I kind of because it was such a dramatic shift in my life. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of just rethink my entire life. And like, I think this past August, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go in a completely different direction. And, um, it's just fascinating, like
Yeah.
that those milestones and mile markers really allow, I guess, provoke a reflection of, hey, am I on the right path? What would Don do? What would Joan do in this situation?
Mm.
And yeah, that's super fascinating.
Yeah, you're touching on something too. I think when there's a shock and an awareness of our mortality, which is what you're trying to wake people up to gently with this uh, podcast, is I think it really does have you orient differently. And after that year, it's like I make decisions in my life that are really driven by my core values and what feels
Mhm.
like the right thing. And a lot of people question it, right? Like they're like, or they talk about how courageous. I have that a lot. You are really brave, or you're so courageous. And I'm like, I am. Like, I don't think about it that way, but I guess it is more like life is short and I'm not going to like stay in a situation that's not feeding my soul. And
For
if
sure.
it's not right, I'm ready to admit it sooner and to move to a different way. Like make like what changes can I make? And
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that. I love that. And I think that, that breeds to at least the journey of happiness, of being, instead of being
Mhm.
stuck in a situation, being able to make, Tony Robbins would say, just being able to get to the decision where you're making a massive change is very powerful.
Yeah, I just wrote a post on LinkedIn this, I think it was this week or last week. I saw that oh, what is her name? The woman who wrote Grit, Angela Duckworth,
Yep.
has written a new book called Situated.
Okay.
And she's got like four things that you really need in order to be well situated in life for success. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so well situated. And
Mhm.
I was like, how did that? And I realized, oh, I think that's part of this motivation to make choices that are really life affirming and
Sure.
that are coherent with who I am as an individual. And as a result, I mean, I live a very unique lifestyle on a ranch with 10 horses. And in, I, it's not like grew up with horses. Like this is very new, but somebody gave me an
Mhm.
invitation and I was a yes, and it's fulfilled all those different things. So I think that there's something about when you have that knowing and it's such a solid yes for you, like what it means to just go for it and see what can happen.
100%.
Yeah.
I love that. And it sounds like that's what felt right for you from a coping mechanism of like,
Hmm.
life is a game of many pivots and just finding what the right puzzle pieces are together, especially after, the traumatic loss at a young
Yeah.
age.
And one thing that I just remembered about my mom, and I'm not sure how I knew about it. I don't think she like talked a lot about it, but I do remember that she worried and had anxiety about the future and the possibility of becoming infirm and being dependent. She was
Mm,
somebody who served and loved to take care of others, and she like dreaded menopause, or she like the idea of like see like not being able to be mobile, or and none of that ended up coming to play for her, right? So it's like she spent a lot of her life's energy and focus on something that never came to pass for her. And I think
yeah,
that that's another guiding principle for me. Like I have anxiety and fear about things, but I don't let that be the guiding principle of my life, or I don't spend a lot of time there. It's more like maybe a touchdown or a reminder, like, oh, I need to pay attention here, but it's not not so much like, and I'm not being wild abandon either about the future. It's
right,
like, oh no, I need to look into long-term insurance, or I need to look
right,
into, making sure I'm saving for the future, like, because I don't want to presume I'm not going to need it, but not worrying, not being in a place of worry where it's like
paralyzing.
impacting my, enjoyment of life. Yeah. Mhm.
100%. And that's a great, segue into our money section. The I think the analogy on this podcast would be, I'm actively thinking about my estate plan and the plans that I have in place, the powers of attorney and stuff like that. I have planned forward and taking care of that risk, but it's not, holding me back. I'm not so worried to go in an airplane because, then someone is going to have to step up and become the executor of my estate or whatever it might be. I'm still going out and living my life and I'm not thinking about it daily, but I'm checking that box to make sure, hey, I've thought about it. I have taken care of this what if, and now I'm just going to
Mhm.
go live my life to its fullest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Emily, do you remember the immediate action steps that your family took at 14 years old when your mom died?
The only action steps that were taken that I was aware of had to do with the funeral, because my parents never really talked about it. She was 44. They certainly didn't think it was anything like that was going to happen anytime soon, and I don't think there was any plans about burial plots or what her wishes would have been. Like that's the biggest pain point for me, is never having had those conversations that I think we're going to talk about. But it was really about like where does she get buried? And is she going to be cremated, or is she going to be in a, like just those detaily things. And I think my dad must have done it. I don't know who was involved with that. And then it was, the funeral arrangements. And, I was just told how to behave, how to dress,
Mhm.
what to do, what not to do. And I just, went through those motions as best I
Yeah,
could.
for sure.
And lots of relatives descended. Um, and, but there was nothing really talked about.
Yeah.
Mm-mm,
Did you know if your mom had a will or any type of plan?
I don't know.
Okay. Well,
I'm
what
pretty sure that everything would have just passed to my dad because my brothers and I weren't told anything about anything coming to us.
makes sense?
Yeah.
What questions did you mentioned those, we didn't get to talk about a lot of things. So
Mm-hmm.
what questions do you wish you would have asked your mom about her wishes, her values, her legacy, inheritance?
Yeah, I lead my TEDx about this because it made such a difference for me in terms of what happened, not doing that. So, and of course, I don't blame anybody. Nobody knew she was going to die so suddenly, but there was never any conversation with my mom in terms of what her wishes would have been or what she would have wanted or her values at all. Like, just have to guess based on how she lived her life. Um, but what happened after the funeral was that all these relatives were there and they started going through her closet and her drawers and her jewelry. And I it was one of those, I was frozen and couldn't really speak up and just watched it in horror. Like I wanted them
Mm,
all out and I didn't want anything moved. And it was like, this is sacred space, get out kind of thing. But I didn't say that. And I just watched as they found things and took things. And her mother, my grandma, found a necklace in her jewelry box that was actually my necklace that my mom was keeping for me. And she was going to take it. And that's when I spoke up and I said, "No, you can't take that. That's mine." And that was a really scary thing to do. Um, and yet I felt like I had a right to say that because it was mine in that moment. And then I was like, and I'm really uncomfortable with, I couldn't say that, don't take anything else. But I just was able to ask for that. So
yeah.
they left with things that were hers and it really broke my heart because I wasn't ready to part with them yet. And felt a sense of like losing more of her. And I just so wish I'd had that conversation with her and known if she wanted me to have any of those things or
Right.
what she would have wanted me to have or, just anything
It,
like that.
it's very common though after a loss is that it's kind of becomes unless somebody dictates exactly who what goes to who, and that's very rare. I would say maybe 5% of people actually do that. There may be, hey, all the jewelry goes to this individual legally, but a lot of the times it just becomes a free for all, for lack of a better term. So
Mhm.
transitioning into your work, um, how do you recommend families navigate that, whether it's a
Mhm.
home or a big plot of land or smaller, more like equally as meaningful items?
Well, obviously the thing is talk about it soon and often.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is a sense of inclusion. Where mischief happens in families more than anything is when one person has the conversation with one of the parents and then others find out about it after the fact. So like in my family, I remember my stepmom at one point saying, "Oh yeah, when it comes time, your younger brother's getting all of the slate topped furniture." And there's like three pieces of furniture my parents had collected over the years that were kind of unusual and like wood with slate. And I was like horrified. Like I never even thought about these pieces of furniture, right? And it's not
Mhm.
like I would even want them, but I was like, "What? Who gets to say who gets what? Wait, you agreed to my brother getting like wait?" And it was like, and it was such a visceral experience. And here I facilitate this for families, and it kind of made me step back. I'm like, huh, that really brings up that we should probably have a process for
Yeah.
talking about and thinking about like if somebody expresses an interest in something that it's like, is it automatically theirs or is there a way to have? And she said, well, you're going to be getting your mom's china and your mom's silver. And I'm like, I am. And I don't know if my brothers would want that. Or like my
Right.
older brother, his wife wears my mom's engagement ring. And
Mm.
it's like, well, I guess that makes sense, but how did that come about? And it's just, if you have some sort of way of talking about how you go about making your decisions before you make the decisions, it can create so much more harmony and trust within the family system. And like when you talked about land, like I'm doing a 4 generation family retreat this weekend on a 40-acre farm that they own, that the founding generation got for the family. And they all now need to decide, as this 3rd generation is now co-owners with the 2nd generation, and they've got 10 great grandchildren in the 4th generation. What is this going to look like? And how do they make decisions together? And how do they do it fairly when there's 2 family branches and one branch has 4 children and one branch has 1? And it's like,
Mm.
oh, you can't just have majority. Like, how do
Right.
you make it so that it's everyone has a say, everyone has input, and there's a alignment in whatever decisions made with the shared ownership.
Right.
And then they're going to be looking at whether they're going to keep it or not, right? And what is
Yeah.
required, and different what ifs, and the whole idea is to facilitate these conversations and train them and give them really great education on how to have the conversations go well. I don't
Yeah.
come in with like as an authority saying this is how you should do it. It's much more of a, how do these conversations go when you have them, and what
Right.
gets in the way of them being successful, and how to support them and really having that trust with each other around how to talk about it.
Right. I think of it as a team, and
Mhm.
I think everybody needs to be included or rowing the boat in the same direction as a team. And there still needs to be a coach who is making the final decision. If you include, when people ask me what my strengths and weaknesses are when I'm leading a team, I ask for everybody's opinion, and then I take everybody's opinion into account because I want everybody to feel included. But sometimes, that paralyzes or stops the decision making process because you're including
Mhm.
everybody's opinions, and everybody has an opinion and they're all in different directions and slightly
Mhm.
different. And
Yeah.
so and especially when it comes with family and grief and legacy and these items that have been in
Mhm.
families for generations, like
Yep.
jewelry, china, land, etc., it's really
Mhm.
hard to navigate.
Yeah, and it's best when the family comes up with their like purpose statement and their like core principles related to how they want to be with each other, and what's the reason for having this. And if there's a
Mm-hmm.
shared sense of purpose, that can really guide the decision making, and then having a really clear decision making process that's followed.
Yeah.
And I'm a strong proponent for an equalizing way of transparently sharing information, and then also being able to share opinions. Because in some families, the dynamic is such that it doesn't feel safe to just openly share your opinion, or it can be a like a bulldozing effect where you just get kind
Right.
of, it doesn't really get heard or experienced. So having some sort of mechanism, I like to use anonymous surveys, or, some way that people can give their thoughts and ideas and know that they're going to be included equally with all the other ones, and they're going to be given weight in the decision making. But
Mm-hmm.
then where there's a process where it doesn't go on forever, right? And it's like it's towards a solution, and we're going to have a conversation. I like different conversations, like a conversation for speculation, like what could this look like? That's what I'm going to be doing this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a conversation for like real possibility, like of all these different ideas, which are the ones that are the most realistic that we could actually have a successful outcome with, because that
Right.
narrows it down, taking all of the ideas into account. And then a conversation for action, and
Yeah.
what's it going to take to actually implement it, and who needs to be in charge, and what kind of progress reports are we going to need so that it actually gets done and fulfilled.
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah.
love that. It's basically just the journey of, hey, we're discovering what the
Mhm.
different options are. Everybody's included in that. Then out of all the different options, let's narrow it down a little bit, and then let's take action and implement. Makes
Yeah.
sense how most people make decisions, and doing it in a larger family structure, it should make sense there as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, in your TED in your TEDx, you talk about members of both the giving family and the inheriting generation feeling that cost of silence. So now we just talked about how in your work with families how it looks like when it goes relatively well.
Mhm.
The cost of silence, why is that cost of silence so negatively impactful when it comes to values around money? And what are some of the things that you commonly see or commonly happen where due to that silence?
Oh, this is a big conversation. So
Yeah.
basically, parents, really well meaning, with the very important concerns, are concerned about if we tell too much, if we talk about what's coming down the pike, what this inheritance could be or will be, that they will somehow be robbing the beneficiaries of their own agency in the world and their own volition. Like they want them to be, contributing members of society, or they want them to be not relying on this, and they don't want them to become entitled, right? Like they don't want them to presume that they're getting something and that they don't have to work, or they can just keep taking and taking, and the goose is going to keep laying the golden eggs, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
But that keeps parents or grandparents from specifically talking about and preparing the beneficiaries for what's ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very common circumstance that can happen. And then on the beneficiary side, there is this overwhelming sense of responsibility and fear of not meeting expectations and not knowing what the expectations are, or having the sense of the goalpost always being moved. So they never have a way of feeling like they've reached some sort of place where they've earned the right to know.
Yeah.
And they also don't want to come across as looking at being greedy or entitled or selfish by being curious, but they just need to know, like,
Mm-hmm.
do I need to be socking away most of my additional income towards my retirement, or is some of that going to be covered? Do I
Right.
need to be planning for my kids' education, or is that being covered? Like, it's just so helpful for their planning and their understanding about um, what their reality is. It's very
Right.
hard to plan in a vacuum when you don't know. And then there's this fear of bringing it up or talking about it because you don't want to be perceived in this bad light.
Yeah.
So that's a huge cost that can happen. And I'll give a really painful example from when I worked at one consulting firm where a father was advised to get a large insurance policy on his life so that when he passed away, there would be significant uh, liquidity and cash for the son who was working side by side with him and was going to have to take it all over. So there'd be
Mm-hmm.
no stress and he would have no worries. And
Hmm.
so the father, those premiums can be quite high.
Yeah.
And he forwent enjoyment of what he was building on a certain level because of that policy. And when the insurance broker, the gentleman passed away, came and gave the son this enormous check and said, you now have all this money, so you don't have to worry about anything with the business. The son was horrified because he didn't want to be in the business. He never wanted to be in the business. The only reason he was in the business was because he knew that his dad wanted him to be, and it was totally out of obligation. But he had no intention of keeping it and was planning on selling it immediately or just liquidating it. And to know that his father did not get to fully enjoy the fruits of his labor out of trying to take care of his son's future when the son had no vested interest in it was so heartbreaking. And
Yeah.
it could have been so avoided if they just had the conversation and had been able to be that transparent and sincere with each other in terms of what they both wanted.
100%.
So
Wow.
that's one example. And it happens all the time in different levels because of not talking about things and just presuming.
Yeah, I think I have a number of different comments here. So on that example that you just shared, the thought process that just money will solve everything. If I just get a big lump sum check of, X millions of dollars, I won't have to worry about the business. I have the freedom to sell it if I want to or continue to work in it.
Mhm.
And that'll be enough to replace me. Like it adds a little bit of freedom, but it's definitely not, I'm sure that in that example, that child would rather have had his dad back and have enjoyed more moments with his dad instead of having his dad struggle
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
to pay this massive premium. And
Yeah,
that
exactly.
and the importance of co-planning is like co-family planning is
Mm-hmm.
so important because that responsibility, like you said, the sense of responsibility when something inevitably does happen goes to that younger generation. And if that younger generation is not privy to those conversations, they live with the guilt of I inherited this business and this life insurance check and my dad didn't get to enjoy their life.
Exactly.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
And just two more things that I
Mm-hmm.
want to point out are, one is like a lot of people just don't know. They don't know the questions to ask. They don't know, that at 14 years old, you didn't know that your family members were going to come in and take the jewelry because it was relatively up for grabs. And, part of our mission here at the Currency of Grief is to educate people as to some of these stories and what they should be asking and thinking about. And I just want to give you kudos at 14 to speak up and say, no, that necklace is mine. You mentioned how scary it is to ask that older generation of, hey, what is my role in your estate plan? Or what do you want to happen to this? That's a really nerve-wracking conversation that a lot of times you feel like you're not privy to because you may be in your teens or 20s and they're in their 50s and 60s and, successful or further along in life. They haven't shared it yet. And so, just not knowing. And I feel like, you were incredibly brave to just put your foot down because at some point you become the parent of your parents and have to speak up.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a whole other conversation about when that changes, that differential. Yeah, and I'll share. There's a story. So I have a book that's coming out on trust and money and families, and
Cool.
we share a story in there that I think is pretty common, where a woman's mother had shared with her, we have all these heirlooms and family mementos and things with stories. And I'm so excited and happy that you're going to be getting all of them. And the daughter never had a further conversation with her about it. And when she passed away, the daughter was in this position of, what am I allowed to do with this stuff? Like, can I sell some of it? Can I give some of it away? Do I have to keep it all? Like, because they never really talked about like the meaning behind it and the stories and why that meant so much to her mother. There wasn't a way for her to come into her mind in terms of what would be what would feel right for her and for what the purpose of was. And that's where that legacy piece comes in. Like, wait, what's my responsibility with what's been accumulated or what's been given to me?
Right.
And being willing to and have that conversation and open it up is so important.
Yeah, that's huge. Wendy Wright, it was one of our podcast guests, and she spoke about this in the workshop that allowed me to invite her to the podcast. And it was the inheritance plan, not just the estate plan, which is the normal documents that, say, hey, Emily gets X, Y, and Z. But then the inheritance plan are the wishes, intentions, and desires for Emily's inheritance, for example. And so, hey, like, yeah, you could do what you want. I would love if you keep this, and, you do what you want with X, Y, and Z. Because at that point, if you do inherit all of mom or dad's or both's items, then you need, a 5, 6, 7 bedroom house just to keep everything.
Yeah, it can get that way. Yeah, and there's so much attached to those items, right?
For sure.
The memories and the emotions, and can be good and bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of those conversations and avoiding that cost of silence, what are some conversation openers for families of both generations to have without even having to talk about the numbers?
Yeah, and the TED Talk is, how do you talk about inheritance without talking about numbers? And I think that that's so important for people to realize, God, there's so much you can talk about without actually talking about the things that you're worried about. in
Yeah.
terms of like if they actually know what number, and numbers are, numbers change based on what's going on in the market. So it's not necessarily relevant, but it is important to be, grounded in reality. If your beneficiaries are growing up in a certain level of, understanding of like the neighborhood you live in, the cars you
Mm,
drive, the kind of planes you use, or where you sit on the plane, or like they pay attention, and they have so much access to information on the web now in terms of how much your house is worth, or what the neighbor's house just sold for, or so it's
yeah.
it's kind of unrealistic to think that they don't have an awareness of what the family's level of status is in terms of financial. But
Hmm.
there's so many ways that you can start to have a conversation that's really focused on values and meaning and purpose related to what you have, and like what your values are related to it. And the more you open up those conversations and talk about like, asking like, how do you see us emulating these values, or what are the decisions that we make with our money that show that this is what we really aspire to, or care about the most. And then also being open to say, where might we be falling short, or where might we be contradicting this in some way. And that's the kind of conversation that starts to open up, like, really, what are we about, what do we stand for as a family, and what do we want to be known for. And then that's kind of bringing your legacy to life in the present moment.
Yeah.
And um, it's an interesting like exercise to think about, like, some people like to read obituaries and see, and it's like, well, what would you want in yours, and what do you see are you going to be remembered for? Or I love
Yeah.
that story about the gentleman that the Nobel Prize is named after, and how the Nobel Prize originated because he was erroneously thought to be dead because
Interesting.
of a mistake that was made. And the articles that came out about him had to do with how he was the like designer of death, because he had been the creator of dynamite.
Hmm.
And he was like mortified that that was what he was going to be remembered for. And it ended up changing the trajectory of his legacy. And how did he want to live, and what did he want, what he had built to go towards. And now he's known for the Nobel Peace Prize as opposed to the, deliverer of death. So it's an interesting exercise to explore. And it's not necessarily morbid. It's more about how do we, how we live as really living our legacy now. And what does that look
Hmm.
like? And how do we promote that? So that's from the one generation. And you can certainly ask about that as the younger one to the older. And then the other side is, really wanting to know what the purpose is of this and what the
Hmm.
expectations are. Like, you say you want me to be just happy, but you also want me to get good grades, and you also want me to,
Hmm.
and it's like, like if I go for like going into the Peace Corps, but you want me to live in a nice neighborhood, like how does that happen? Like, I need to know what your expectations are, and what support of different lifestyle choices looks like, like,
Hmm.
and the more you can articulate what the expectations are and then also stay consistent with it, the better it is for everybody involved.
Yeah.
Um,
That
and
that
then,
last comment sounded like my family. It was like,
oh
hey,
yeah,
I want you to get good grades and, live here, and but there's always an element of judgment there as well, as like once you have the conversation, and maybe you have this other sense of responsibility and this other identity of being of your role in the family from a financial standpoint, or an inheritance standpoint. That changes things. It adds a little bit of extra. So I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I did want to just
no, no, that's it's great. It just made me think about one family I worked with where they had to navigate a really significant um emotionally charged conversation that happened when the parents changed their expectations. And
mm,
the parents had told their children, and three children, um, when they were all young adults and getting married, that their estate plan was going to be um, per capita. So it's going to have to do with however many children they had, right?
mhm.
So that all the grandchildren would be treated fairly in the estate plan. And they were wanting to encourage having lots of grandchildren. And after all of their children had passed childbearing years. They're, I guess, the daughters, because it's different for men and women. But when it was no longer feasible and they weren't going to be having any more children, the parents decided to change their estate plan to be for stirpes. So it was going to be for each of the branches, each of the households.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly, the daughter who had 4 children, as opposed to her siblings that had 2 each, went from her 4 getting equal amounts to their cousins to now suddenly they were going to be getting less.
Yeah.
And it was such an odd conversation to have, because it's not like anybody has children for the express purpose of having more money.
Yeah.
But when you're operating under a certain expectation that's been overtly stated, and then it gets changed after the fact, you can't say, look, I would have chosen to have less kids, but it does, there's different factors that go into it, but it's like, wait, how is this fair given that we were operating under a certain set of expectations before?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they had to navigate. So, it's important to stick with your values and what has you, making a decision when you're making it, and then also leaving room for, and, we'll see, circumstances might change, right? We might do special needs trusts versus everybody getting the same amount, or,
Yeah, it sounds like there's a little bit of a double-edged sword when having these conversations, because you have to be really in tune with your values and your rationale, and making sure that the expectations you're setting will stay the expectations. So if you are having these conversations, you want to do the work internally first before having the conversation. And you still don't want to not have the conversation, because it still may leave some doubt if those parents died and they didn't tell their kids, that daughter who had 4 children could feel slighted and they never had that conversation while parents were alive. She just finds out after they're gone that their kids got a different amount.
Yep. Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's such a delicate conversation, which is why we have the podcast and experts like you coming on to give us these examples.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the more things aren't focused on the tactics and more focused on the values and the purpose, the easier it is, because circumstances change. So
100%. I love that. So as the giving generation and, the inheriting generation, what I'm getting from you is just focus on those values, focus on that purpose, and find the space, the tools, the people who can help facilitate those types of conversations so that you're able to make progress and put something in place so that there's harmony in the family.
Yeah.
I love it. So going back to you and your situation, how has your this experience having lost your mom, changed your approach to life and to planning?
Gosh, I don't know how much is conscious or not. It's such an interesting thing. I ended up not having birth children of my own. And I do wonder sometimes if it was like unconscious, I don't ever want to put a child in that kind of circumstance, but I don't, who knows? I know I was married to somebody much older who had older daughters, and I was hoping to raise a granddaughter. It was like, no, I don't need to bring a child into this mix. Like, there were a lot of practical reasons why. So who knows? But I ended up really focusing on helping families in a larger way. I became much more of a global, I don't know, helping lots of families go have a good experience as opposed to just one. And for my own planning, I think, I really think about what I've been most passionate about, most interested in. You and I have connected around our love of therapeutic camping for assisting people in dealing with illness and grief. And so I've designated a lot of my my estate to go towards the camps that had such a major, incredible impact in my life. And it's where I wrote my master's thesis and where I did 12 years of therapeutic camping. And so it's something I really believe in. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's one thing I've done with my planning. And then the other is, I was thinking about like my mom's life and how when she died, people really wanted to do something. And so one of the things that we all decided as a family, and we talked about it as a family, was to develop a scholarship program in her name and in her honor. And she was a nurse and she was really committed to education. Like she really helped us, all three of us, in terms of our education. And she was really involved in the PTA. And so we created a scholarship for nurses' children's at the children's
Mm-hmm.
hospital where my dad worked, where they could apply and they could get a grant. They could go to anything from like music lessons, like learning an instrument, to books for college, to whatever they applied for, and as long as it had to
Wow.
do with something with their education. And so that was a way of continuing her legacy, and that was funded to such a degree that I think it went for about, gosh, 80, 30 years.
Super
Um,
cool.
yeah. And lot
Amazing.
of people benefited from that in small grants and larger grants. Um, and it was a wonderful way to continue to keep her memory alive and her legacy, what mattered most to her.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's super special. And that's it kind of started in the 80s and stopped 30 years later.
yeah,
So it's no longer
just
active
about.
today.
I think they ended up spending it down. I think when my dad retired was when
Yeah.
um,
It-
they just decided to spend it down. And
yeah. Well, that's so special. I mean, just being able to honor your mom in that way for years and years and keep
yeah,
her legacy of kindness and empathy alive
yeah,
and giving people opportunity, especially nurses, is really special.
yeah.
Super cool. Well, Emily, as we wind down, I've final question here. I want you to imagine that there's a young girl, 14 years old,
Mhm.
listening to this podcast. What grief mantras or words of wisdom would you like to leave with that girl if she were to experience something similar to you, having lost mom
Wow.
at the young age of 14?
Mhm. Um, and what comes to mind is grace and gratitude. That giving yourself grace in those moments when it's just so hard to even breathe, and you don't feel like you can eat, or you don't feel like anybody in the world could possibly understand what you're going through, and just um, allowing yourself the grace to have whatever you need to have in that moment, and um, to let others know that you're having a harder time right then and you just need some grace,
Mm-hmm.
can be really helpful. And then the gratitude is of everything I've done a lifetime of study of this. The more I tap into what I'm grateful for and keeping the memories alive that were so special and so beautiful, that keeps uh, my mom alive within me today, and keeps me feeling connected and supported. Um, and I think the other thing that I've really been studying a lot of recently is more and more is the power of regret.
Mm.
So especially if you regret things that you said or you didn't say, 14 is a very difficult time for a teenager, and especially with their mother. It's when you talk back, or it's when uh, you might be more solemn, or you might not be as communicative, and you wish you'd said this, or you wish you hadn't said that. And when there's no way to change it because the person has gone,
Yeah.
the most important thing you can do is use the power of that to then inform how you want to live the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So since you can't change that thing that you wish you could have changed in the past, what can you do in the future to make it so that you don't have to experience that kind of regret again?
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think a friend mentioned to me the anticipatory regret, and using that as a decision-making framework. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you wanted to have a conversation with someone, but you didn't know where to start or were standing in your own way,
Yeah.
um, thinking about that is, if today was all of our last day, would I regret having this conversation? And maybe that
Mm-hmm.
will give you the power and the confidence to move forward, or, um,
Yeah.
insert big life decision here. Hey, I wasn't able to have this experience with my dad. Let me go channel this experience in some other way with my brother, with a best friend, with my mom, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Super special.
Yeah.
Emily, is there anything else you want to leave our audience with? Any other final lessons?
Oh gosh. I mean, everybody's grief experience is very personal. And I think that that's where the grace is also really important, is don't think it should look a certain way or it's supposed to be anything other than what it is for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very impactful. And I appreciate that. And I know
Yeah.
our audience appreciates that and all the amazing lessons that you've shared and stories you've shared on this podcast, both the people that you've impacted throughout your work career and your own personal life, your journey and your story. So I really appreciate talking about grace and gratitude. Your stories and the way you speak is so graceful. And I have so much gratitude that you came on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you. I so appreciate you having me, and I just love what you're doing. So thank you. It was a meaningful conversation for sure.
Of course. Emily, how can people find you if they want to reach out regarding the book or your retreats and so on and so forth?
Oh, EmilyBouchard.com is probably the easiest way. I do so many different things. If you're interested in the book, it's trustmoneyfamilies.com, and there's ways to pre-order it, and then you can download some, like a purpose process for your family if you want to explore that.
Cool.
So that can be a wonderful thing to do too.
Okay, I'll link it to the show notes. That sounds amazing. But
Thank
Emily,
you.
this has been an incredibly insightful and graceful conversation, and I just appreciate it.
Thanks, Justin.
Of course. And podcast family, thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Currency of Grief. Don't forget, it's a great day to have a great day. So go have a great day. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Currency of Grief podcast. My hope is that today's conversation brought you clarity, comfort, and even a spark to start those difficult but necessary conversations in your own life. If you found this episode helpful, it would mean the world to me if you would share it with one other person who you feel this podcast could impact. And please, take a moment to leave us a 5-star review. Your review will help us reach more people who need this resource. Remember, the best time to talk about death and money was yesterday. The second best time is now. Until next time, I'm Justin Weidenfeld, your Grief Financial Officer, and this has been the Currency of Grief podcast.